gas emissions from major wetlands in Kerala, and factors triggering bleaching in coral reef islands of Lakshadweep archipelago in collaboration with CBAS or INCOIS. Dr. Gopinath is a Commonwealth Fellow and has participated in the Indian Arctic 3 times and is collaborating with prestigious organizations like NCPOR, Goa, INCOIS, Hyderabad, NRSC, Hyderabad, and SACISRO, Ahmedabad, through various collaborative research projects worth 2.5 crore. In February 2024, she received the Indian Society of Analytical Scientists Honorary Fellowship. Dr. Gopinath was instrumental in bringing the new Arctic membership to QFOS. Welcome, Dr. Gopinath.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to talk at this conference, and also special thanks to my friend Dr. Manisha for the invitation. So, I will be discussing about some of the findings which we have made as part of our Arctic and Southern Ocean expeditions, which we have carried out along with the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, Goa, under Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India. So that's what I'm trying to present here: invisible pollutants, fragile poles, and it's turning science into policy, which is the need of the hour, as we have been discussing right from the morning onwards. We are discussing about moving towards a sustainable future. So this presentation, since we are discussing about the silent contaminants or the invisible pollutants from the poles, this presentation will basically focus on 2 different types of pollutants, which is actually getting attention globally as far as the research is concerned, not from the poles and also from the other tropical and temperate regions globally. So these are actually, the first one is the microplastics, and the second one is the persistent organic pollutants. And you all know that what are microplastics, and both of them are actually silent contaminants. And when we think about this microplastics, actually it is not visible to our naked eye. And also for persistent organic pollutants, we need more complicated, sophisticated instrumentation techniques, as well as very precise sampling, as well as analysis, since we always detect them in very minute concentrations, maybe in nanograms or micrograms from the environmental system. And the microplastics are, as we all know, they are all tiny fragments, which is less than 5 millimeter in size. And they originate from different sources, and we know that globally we are discussing a lot about plastic pollution. And it's not about the microplastics pollution, because those which are visible to the human eye, that is the macroplastics. And we are finding it very difficult to replace plastics with any other materials which will be economically viable as far as the common man is concerned. And again, we have been discussing about the agricultural practices also. Right now, Somerset has discussed something about this, and also morning also we have seen the talk from Dr. Nair. So that means our agricultural practices itself is actually creating a lot of pollutants, mainly in the form of this organic pollutants, which we use mainly in this crop control, and also as in the case of this removal of this harmful herbs and other things, and also in pesticide, which will mainly come into the class of this pesticide type of compounds. And globally we call them as the persistent organic pollutants, and I think you must have heard a lot about Stockholm Convention and other things, which are trying to classify the persistent organic pollutants into different classes. Maybe you must have heard about the dirty pests like the DDT and many other organochlorine variety of compounds which we use widely in agricultural practices. So what happens is that our poles, the polar regions, see both the South Pole as well as the North Pole. So this is actually acting as a sink for the global contaminants. Since we are discussing about this sustainable practices, see what we are trying to generate in the lower latitudes, for example, what we generate in the tropical regions and what we use in the tropical regions for this, either it is in the form of plastics or in the form of persistent organic chemicals. So whatever is getting generated in this particular lower latitudes are getting transported into the higher latitudes, that is to both poles, both to the south pole as well as to the north pole, and the polar regions are basically acting as a sink for all these type of global contaminants. So you can see on this, you can see a diagram on this, maybe to the right side. So you can see that many of these persistent organic pollutants and other things, they are actually going through four different processes. And we call this, scientifically we call this as a grasshopper effect. You know what is grasshopper? It is an insect. And it has a special type of this legs for this jumping. So this chemical which is actually generated within the lower latitudes, they are also actually jumping like grasshopper from the lower latitudes to both poles, Arctic as well as to Antarctica. And during this jumping process, actually you can call it as a four-step process. One is what we call as the cold condensation, which is mainly happening in the poles. See, once the chemical reaches the poles will act as a sieve. We know that the poles are already very cold in nature. So once the chemical get introduced into this colder region, so what happens is that this particular cold environment is actually facilitating its deposition there for a longer time. And again, there are two other processes which is mainly happening in the lower latitudes, which is facilitating the jumping of this chemicals from the lower latitudes to the higher latitudes. That is nothing but the global distillation. So global distillation means all these chemicals that we are generating in the lower latitudes, they are already volatile in nature. They have a tendency to get vaporized very easily. So what happens is that the particular temperature in that region is actually vaporizing the chemical, and the chemical is actually going through this process of this jumping, and then ultimately it is reaching to both the poles, and at the poles the cold temperature is actually facilitating its deposition in that particular region. And we always see that the poles are fragile in nature. We know that both Arctic as well as Antarctica, especially Antarctica, we know there is no human settlement. So what is there in the Antarctica is nothing but the research activities. And we know that we have around 100 research stations which is right now very active in Antarctica. And in Arctic there are human settlements also. But actually there are two processes which is actually making this fragile poles to more and more risky, moving towards more risky nature. One is the long range transport of the pollutants, because I have already told you that most of these pollutants are getting transported to the poles, they are having volatile nature, so there is every possibility that they can travel through long distances. And coming to Antarctica, what is the second threat is that it is having more than 100 active research stations, and this increased the scientific as well as the tourist activity to both Arctic as well as to Antarctica is actually posing a serious threat to both these regions in terms of this accumulation of this pollutions. So along with this, so we have been discussing about the organic chemicals and also the plastics, not only the microplastics, the macro as well as even the tiny version of microplastics, what we call as the nanoplastics. So what happens is that once the plastic is moving from the lower latitudes to the poles, what happens is that it is not only the plastic that is being transported to the longer regions. So along with the plastic, so if you look into the diagram on the right hand side, this plastic surface itself is having a lot of mechanism to absorb or to by different other type of chemical interactions which is happening on the plastic surface and the chemicals with which it comes in contact. So what happens is that along with this plastic material, it also has got a tendency to transport various other contaminants into the region. So what happens is that the plastic itself is acting as a vector, and it will transport microorganisms as well as any other chemical contaminants which has got an affinity to stick onto the surface of this plastic. And we have several categories of POPs. We may not be looking into all the categories as part of our study, but we are focusing on some of the pesticides, then polychlorinated biphenyls, then byproducts like dioxins. And again, nowadays we are more into new varieties of chemicals, that is like polyfluorinated compounds and also several varieties of flame retardants, which are mainly brominated compounds. So these are our papers from Arctic. So there is one is about the pesticides. Pesticides under the category of persistent organic pollutants from the Arctic fjords and lakes. And other one is again on pesticides and microplastics again from the Arctic system, which we have generated as part of the Arctic expedition. And this is our study area. This is actually the study area by the which is set by National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India. We all are part of the research courses which is being arranged by Institute Everywhere. So this is actually a comparison between 2 years, that is concentration of this organochlorine compounds between 2 years, 2 sampling years, that is 2018 and 2019, that is just before the COVID. So you can see the presence of DDT. So we know that DDT is actually globally it is banned. I think we started banning of this particular chemical in 1980s. But in this study, you can see the presence of this DDT, and then DDD and DDE. Actually, they are the breakdown products of DDT. DDT is a chemical that we have used widely. And when DDE persists in the environment for a long time, it will break down into its metabolites, that is DDD and DDE. And along with that, there is also presence of this another chlorinated compound, which is also coming under the list of this dirty and chemicals as per the Stockholm Convention. So that means even the pristine environment like this, Arctic fjords are also showing the presence of this chlorinated pesticide category compounds as part of our June expedition. Now again this year onwards we again started looking into this as a comparison between this pre-COVID and post-COVID changes in the concentration. We started looking into the same variety, and I'm not presenting the results here. So this is a comparison between 18 and 19. And it is not only the DDT that we have looked into, or the chlorinated varieties that we have looked into, we have also looked into other varieties of compounds. We know that it's diuron, again, it's also the list of this chemicals, then chlorpyrifos, dicophos, and several other pesticide varieties were detected from the Arctic region as part of these 4 observations which were carried out in 18 and 19. And again, what we did is that we did another analysis in 2023, and this year also, last month also we have completed one sampling. We are waiting the result. So in 2023 also, if you look into the concentration of this DDT varieties, you can see the presence of DDT and its metabolites still from the Arctic region. And another interesting observation that we could see in 2023 is that a new variety of compound, that is the last one, the green one, on that bar diagram, you can see that is called diuron. And actually, when we started banning the organochlorine compounds in 1980s, what happened is that we started promoting organoamino compounds because we are thinking that this amino compounds, compared to the organochlorine compounds, the organoamino varieties of this pesticides were found to be less harmful. We were not actually having so many studies related to the environmental effects of these kind of compounds, and we started widely using this organic amino compounds as pesticides. So this diuron is coming into that class of compound, organoamino compounds, which was actually widely used not only in the less developed countries and also in this developed countries are also using this compound for this in the farming of this beech and other varieties of crops. So our indication was that that the same experiment, or what we call the same analysis for the analysis of the same kind of compounds we did in our Southern Ocean expedition also. You know that Southern Ocean is the coastal Antarctica region, and we can also call it as the Antarctic Ocean. So India is also having research stations in Southern Ocean. We have a permanent research station in Antarctica. In addition to that, we are also having cruises in the Southern Ocean for this sample. So what we observed is that in the Southern Ocean, the coastal Antarctica, okay, there also you can see the presence of this chlorinated pesticides like metabolite of DDT, other chlorinated pesticides, and also you can see the presence of the amino varieties of these pesticides from Southern Ocean. So one important aspect that we have to be very careful since we are discussing about the sustainable practices or moving towards a sustainable future with that. See all these varieties of compounds, whether it is DDT or it's metabolites or other organochlorine varieties of compounds or amino type of compounds, where it is coming in the Arctic and Antarctica is that it is getting originated from the lower latitudes, and from the lower latitudes, as a result of this evaporation, distillation, and this grasshopper effect, it is getting deposited into the colder region. So what happens once it is getting deposited in the colder region, there is no mechanism to eliminate it from that particular colder environment, because it has to get warmed and warmed, and then only it can get back into the atmosphere or it can get transported to other regions. So there is a trapping mechanism which will deposit the chemical into that particular cold region. So that is a very important aspect, or very that means how careful we have to be, or how responsible should be our agricultural practices or any other practices where we are using this wide variety of chemicals without any proper control mechanisms. And again, now the entire world is looking into the harmful effects of this amino varieties of compounds. Up to 2023, we are thinking that all these amino varieties of this herbicides or pesticides that we are using widely is comparatively harmless. So one thing is that since in our study, it's also published also, we could detect the presence of this diuron, which is an amino variety of herbicide. So what happens is that this diuron itself, it seems to be harmless. It seems to be harmless. But what happens? When it is there in the environment for a longer period, it will degrade into another compound. It will degrade into another metabolite. We call it as the dinitroaniline. And this dinitroaniline is found to be very harmful. It is found to be having carcinogenic nature, and it is not, and also it is found to be very harmful to algae and other aquatic plants. So that is about the persistence of these kind of chemicals into the colder environment. Now, so these are some of our publications from Southern Ocean. So whatever we could observe in terms of this organic pesticides and microplastics or any other contaminants from the Arctic and also from the Southern Ocean, we try to publish it as early as possible because we are continuously into this monitoring of these kind of pollutants on a yearly basis as part of this crucial both regions. Now, again, what we did is that we did some work on this microplastics, presence of this microplastics from both these Arctic as well as from this Southern Ocean region. So what happens is that you can see the images. So these images are actually the microscopic images of this. These are the polymer spectra of this corresponding microplastics. Since you are an expert on it, I'm not going into the polymeric details, but you can see the different shapes of this plastics which we have observed, microplastics which we have observed as part of this observations from this both from the Arctic and also from this Southern Ocean environment. So what we have observed is that we have different types of microplastics from both Arctic and Southern Ocean. And in our observation, the fiber type of microplastics, fiber which is mainly used in this textiles and also in this fishing activities, and also many of the plastic polymers that we use are in the fibrous form. So most of these areas were found to be having a very high concentration of this fiber type of microplastics, and also followed by the fragments and the film type of plastics. And again, we also have a small percentage of this bead varieties, so that is microplastics are also there in bead shape, which we widely use in our cosmetic products. For example, in face wash and other things that we scrubs and other things that we use as this beauty care products, they contain this microplastics in the wheat food. So that means all these, whatever we are discharging into the immediate environment is actually getting carried into the water bodies and ultimately it is reaching into the oceans. And from the oceans, even though it is there in the tropical environment, different types of this oceans accretions and currents are carrying them into the remote areas and then even into the pristine environments like Arctic and also Southern Ocean. And these are again different varieties, the shades and the colors of this microplastics particles that we could observe. You can see how the fiber will look, microscopic images of this fiber variety of microplastic, then how the fragments will look, how the beads will look, and also we have clusters of this microplastic. So these are different observations, and depending upon the site, it will vary. The color, the shading, and many other things will vary. So, and these are also the different spectroscope, polymeric microscope. The FKR images of these different varieties of plastics. I think you must be knowing some names, common varieties of plastics that we use in our daily life: polyethylene, then PET, polyethylene terephthalate, then polyamides, and then polyurethane, like that, different types of polymers, which is very common in our daily use. So these are actually, these polymeric varieties are actually observed from even from the distinct regions like Arctic and also from this coastal Antarctica. So then here comes the science in this, how we can integrate or how we can integrate our observations, the other observations both from the Arctic and also from this Southern Ocean into policy development. So we have seen that even Indian government is also pumping a lot of money into polar research. We know that we have two permanent research stations in Antarctica, Maitri and Bharati, and also we have that we started Antarctic research in 1980s, and we started Arctic research in 2008 with the establishment of the Schema Base Station in the Arctic. So that means we are also pumping a lot of money, and one of our major focus area is that is looking into this and climate change issues in the Arctic, and also looking into different types of this environmental pollution which is happening both in the Arctic and in the Antarctica, and also we are looking into the biodiversity aspect, how the climate change is affecting the biodiversity of both these regions. So as part of the Indian research, not only as part of the Indian research, because globally a lot of people are working in both areas, both in Arctic as well as in Antarctica. So we could see or we could detect the presence of many of these harmful varieties or harmful chemicals, whether it is pesticides or whether it is any other type of emerging contaminant or microplastic or heavy metal. So people have started detecting all these from the snows and then from the sea ice. Then if it is in the Arctic, it is the polar bear, and if it is in the Antarctic, it is the penguin. So that means we are just reporting the concentration, or even if it is at a very low level, we are detecting the presence of these type of varying type of emerging pollutants from both these regions. So as part of these observations, we have two major groups which are actually focusing into both regions. One is AMAP, which is Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. And for the Antarctica, we have the scientific committee on this Antarctic research, which is SCAR. So this, if you go to the website of this AMAP, you can see a series of reports. A series of reports which is actually concentrating on the presence of different varieties of pollutants from different regions in the Arctic. And our research, India's research is also a part of all these type of reports. So what happens? So that means all these reports are actually being taken care by AMAP, then from the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, and also we have the UArctic, which is actually a network of different countries, which is a part of the Arctic Circle, and we have a common research forum working as part of this UArctic. And your university, Technology University is a member of this UArctic, and our university is also a member of the UArctic. So that means what are research findings that we make as part of our expeditions, we have a forum to present these research in these committees. So that means they are incorporating all these points in their reports or in their yearly publications. So that means that is made for the policy developments as part of this protecting this Arctic as well as other. And you also know that we have the Stockholm Convention, and the Stockholm Convention banned several persistent organic pollutants. But now what we have is that we have new varieties of these chemicals. See, for example, the organoamino compounds and many other new class of chemicals which we use in the lower latitudes, which has to be brought into the attention of this Stockholm Convention, and it has to be annexed, or it has to come as an annexure, that is for the additional banning of these type of chemicals in the subsequent years. So the way forward is that one important thing that which is actually needed for this Arctic and Antarctic research is that we don't have a lot of people working on these poles. And working in this region is actually that is very expensive. We know that India is also spending a lot of money for this polar research. So that means a only selected group of people are actually getting an opportunity to work into the Arctic and Antarctic environment. And so one thing is that it demands, see, protecting these two regions actually demands a strong communication, collaboration, as well as commitments. And that means it has to involve both the language of science and also the language of this policy. So one thing we are very happy is that in 2022, the government has come up with the Arctic policy. So that the India government is actually also giving courses to the Indian university students about the Arctic, and also we are trying to do something about the government's Arctic policy. So that is how responsible we should be while we should how responsible we should be in the lower latitudes with the use of these chemicals, whether it is for industrial purposes or whether it is for agricultural activity, and how it is going to affect the higher latitudes, or how it is going to affect the poles. So that means these kind of activities we are also trying to give to our students. So we are also running one course on this particular online program for understanding the Arctic, the climate, and the need for environmental protection. So that means we are trying to educate the youth the need for protecting these two pristine ecosystems, because once the ice starts melting, so we know that the effects are going to be very serious, because it will bring in a lot of trapped contaminants. It is already trapped in the system, and also it will bring in a lot of pathogens also. That means we are just going to face a lot of issues with the melting of this ice as part of this climate change issues. So our goals may seem distant, but the fate is actually tied to ours. So I thank my team, myself and my students have been a part of several expeditions to Arctic, that's Southern Ocean, and recently we started our expeditions to Antarctica also. So we thank MOES and CPR as well as our university for all these opportunities. And what I would like to conclude is that these invisible pollutants, they remind us that what happens anywhere on Earth matters everywhere. So protecting these fragile forests is not just a scientific responsibility, it is actually a global responsibility. And turning science into policy is not only about understanding the pollutants, it's about ensuring that invisible threats receive visible action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopinath, for that extremely insightful presentation. And I might add that I don't know whether you've heard of this